post-COVID Plymouth County Beekeepers Association meeting. Yay! So we're going to have, there's not a lot of business to talk about. Let's talk about a couple of things. We do have a Marshfield Fair this year. Yay! Hopefully everything can just keep rolling along now. Oh my God, Lisa's come up with a nice plan for the Jones River Watershed. We're all set with that. On the 26th, is it? Yes. Glassware is all in? Okay. 4 to 5 pounders increased in price. Be ready for your invoice. A little bit, she says. Okay. You know how we had the summer picnic? Yeah. So we're going to do it earlier. We're going to do it in June rather than after. Was it after the fair we ended up? Yeah. That was dumb. Too much. 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock. Okay. So it's June 26th at 1 o'clock. Bring food, and the club will provide the usual. I think we do hot dogs and hamburgers and rolls and the paper products and stuff like that. We'll figure all that out. Okay. And we will have Grandma's apple pie. Num num num. Okay. Lisa? Any other business that you can think of? Nope. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Alix. Alix is a master beekeeper, EAS certified. There's 3 in the state. She's one of them, and we're lucky we have her tonight. She's going to talk to us about swarms, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Ann. Ann is my sister from another mother. Right. We love each other. We've been friends for years, and I'm very happy to be here. I am Alexandra Bartsch, and I've been beekeeping since 1978 when I had an excellent biology teacher who encouraged me at Lexington High School and an uncle who kept bees, and off I went. I was the only person beekeeping at Lexington High School, and so I've been beekeeping for over 40 years, and I do all kinds of different things now. I have a little more free time now that I am not practicing law full-time anymore. I'm also an attorney. And so I can talk for days about bees, but I'm not going to because 20 minutes ago, somebody called me as I was almost here and said, "Oh, I've got a swarm in my yard. It's 20 minutes from where you are right now, and it's 4 feet off the ground." So I had a moral dilemma. I seriously considered calling Cliff and saying, "Well, the meeting will be starting a few minutes late tonight," but I pulled over, made a decision, but 5 seconds after this meeting is over, I'll be on the road heading for a swarm. I am also the swarm coordinator for Middlesex County. I live in Lexington in the house that I grew up in. I'm a townie there now. And for the last 10 or 15 years, I've been the swarm coordinator. And I'm going to talk about that, how that works, and honeybee swarms. And you guys chose this date right dead in the middle of swarm season to have this talk. So hopefully it's pretty timely. So I'm going to tell you some things about the biology of the swarm, how to handle. I asked Cliff Yaus when he asked me to speak, I said, well, what level are these people? Because in Middlesex, we've got a lot of beginners and a few intermediates. And so I'm sorry if I'm talking down to you, or if I'm talking up to you, feel free to answer any questions because I can talk all night. My knowledge about swarms is based upon my own knowledge catching swarms for 40 years and being the swarm coordinator. And also, I have read all the books and studied with a great guru of swarms. Anybody know who that is? Tom. The last time I was in this room was 3 years ago. Tom Seeley is probably the foremost authority on swarms in the United States and maybe the most famous bee professor in the world. at this point. I don't know a more famous one. Definitely not in this country. He's up at Cornell, and he's just retired, and he bounces between, places like Harvard and Cornell. I think his father was a professor at Cornell as well. Brilliant guy, humble, nice, happy to speak to any group, including this one. And so when you guys got him 3 years ago, I got in my car and came down here. And I'll tell you an interesting side story about Tom, for those of you who know him. At the time, it was almost exactly 3 years ago, my daughter was a high school senior, and she was waitlisted at Cornell. So after the lecture, I ran right up and said hello to Tom and gave him one of my lemon honey soaps and said, "Tom, my daughter's waitlisted. Is there anything you can do?" And he kind of hemmed and hawed in his usual way and didn't say much. And then a couple weeks later, she got in. And she's up at Cornell now. She just finished her junior year and got home 2 days ago. And we'll never know. And I've said to her, do you think, because Tom is a famous guy. He's the type of guy who I'm sure they listen to up there. And she said, no, I don't think so. I think it was just me. But we'll never know. This group may have changed our lives. So anyhow, back to swarms. Why do bees swarm? I've got a slide presentation, and I try not to do too many slides because I'd rather talk to people and not have a PowerPoint presentation, but it's almost impossible when you're talking about bees because there's so many things to look at, and I'm always taking pictures. I'm one of those guys who pulls my cell phone out and says, oh, look, there's Ann, click, click. And this is a picture. This is just kind of a fun picture to start with. This is from the Smithsonian Magazine, and it's an article about Tom Seeley. And this is one of his studies where he was studying swarms. So he had the undergrads put numbers on every bee in the hive. And he said it takes almost a day if you've got 4 undergrads. And he said, I told them it was a thoughtful exercise. That is, you can think about anything you want while you're doing this because it's mindless. So I thought that was a great picture. I think they're color-coded, and I can't remember the color code, but it's a beautiful thing to see all those bees together. Okay, that's just a fun slide. Next slide. Apparently the gizmo doesn't work, so I have to wave my hands around to move the slides. And this is the outline of what I'm going to talk about tonight. This is my quick and dirty outline, and you can see my phone number very prominently. I have no privacy whatsoever. My phone number is all over the internet. Strangers call me every day, and that's fine. If you're the swarm coordinator, you welcome them. I also get, all kinds of calls about carpenter bees and everything like that, but that's, I'll deal with that because we save an enormous amount of bees. You probably, that's not so easy to read, so we'll move on. This is another prop that I have. Tom Seeley wrote several books, and if you want to read about swarms, this is the one that I recommend, Honeybee Democracy. It's a beautiful book, talks all about swarms, has great pictures, and I actually cribbed some of the photos here, so I didn't realize we'd be on the internet, and so if Tom's watching, thanks, Tom, and I will pay those royalties. I will. Or maybe I'll sell some books for you. But, okay, so first, what is a swarm? Good. Colony's reproduction of another colony. This is the first swarm that I got this swarm season. It was a mile from my house in Lexington, and I got a call from some homeowners who said we have a swarm on our cherry tree. I do a lot of posting on the Massachusetts Beekeepers Association Facebook page. That seems to, be where I post most things, and I'm posting almost every day these days because there are things happening. And I posted this swarm and, got all these snarky comments. Oh, that's almost cheating. Just take the swarm. But this is what they look like when they swarm. And it's called a bivouac. The thing right... How many people, just a show of hands here, have caught a swarm? Okay. So most people here have, so you know what I'm talking about. Oh, I've got to turn this around. Okay, so here's your bivouac. And when the bees swarm... Okay. So here's your bivouac. When the bees swarm, bees are a superorganism, which means that no bee can live alone. So you not only have a lot of reproduction going on within the colony, this time of year you may have 3,000 bees a day being born, but in order to have a new colony, you have to have the whole superorganism reproduce. And the way they do that is swarming. And if they're strong enough, the queen, here's a queen. This year, as you probably know, the marking is white for this year's queens. This is one of my white queens. When the queen is very strong, from the last year, she will be getting crowded, making thousands of bees, and then they can swarm, they can split, and make a new superorganism. And when they do that, she will lay eggs, as she usually does, and the workers are the ones who will feed some of those eggs royal jelly because they need more queens. The old queen's going to go off with a swarm, and the new queens are going to stay in the hive, although sometimes they have after swarms as well. So this is, the important thing is to be able to recognize a queen cell. I have my assistant, Alix, in the back doing the slides. And this is what a queen cell looks like. You can see on this slide, queen cell, queen cell, queen cell. You know, queens are twice as big as your worker bees because they have the long tail with the developed reproductive organs. So they need a long cell to be born in. So the bees will take a larva. You know, you got an egg for 3 days and then a larva, and when the larva is very young, almost too small to see, they will start feeding that larva royal jelly and make her into a queen, and a queen is nothing but a normal worker bee, and you can see the worker bee cells down here. A worker bee fed royal jelly becomes a queen, and they don't put all their eggs in one basket, so you may see lots and lots of different queen cells in a hive that's about to swarm, and it's happening right now, right around May. I always call Memorial Day weekend Swarmorial Day weekend because that's when the bees are swarming. Next slide. Okay, this is just a close-up. You can see in this slide, here's these egg, 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 and then the big queen cell. They've got a larva that they've fed royal jelly. So this is what you need to be looking very closely at in your hives when you're inspecting. Okay, the next slide. When you see those cells, you have a decision. You can either try to cut them out to stop the swarm. When they swarm, they're going to take 50 or 60% of the bees in the hive. So your honey crop is going to be greatly reduced if the bees swarm. But there's not a lot you can do about that. The statistics show that a new queen who's just born usually doesn't swarm the first year. The second year, they're almost hardwired to swarm. If they're strong enough, the second year, there's an enormous percentage of them swarming, and same with the third year. As they get older, it's almost impossible. You know, they have a very strong urge to reproduce, and if they have the strength, they're going to build these cells. So this is one of my apiaries in Lexington, and last weekend I had some time, so I went over there and looked at, I had 2 hives here, and the middle one is the only full-size hive left. These get painted by our high school bee club, and so I pulled it out. I found all these swarm cells, and many of us will just make splits. Who knows how much a queen costs this year? Anybody bought a queen? Yeah, very good. One place I bought some queens, $35 a queen, and another place I bought some queens and they were $42 a queen. And so that's a pretty expensive bug. So when I see a really great hive that's super healthy and has queen cells, I make splits like it's going out of style. So I took the 2 hives and I split them into, I think, 7 nukes, and then I left 1 main hive. And the one on top was just collecting some other bees. But every one of those nukes has either the old queen or a queen cell in it. And when I make the nukes, I give them a frame full of brood and a swarm cell, another frame of brood, maybe a 3rd frame of brood if I have one, a frame of honey, and then a frame of pollen and something else. So these are 5-frame nukes. And I'll leave them alone for a week, and then I'll go back and see who's hatched. The reason that I have a question mark there for make splits is some of us watched. It was Norfolk County last week that had Michael Palmer on for the World Bee Day or National Bee Day or whatever. Anybody see that? He did a Zoom presentation, and he said, I don't do walk-away splits. And there's 2 reasons why you don't want to do walk-away splits. Anybody think of one? Yeah, right. We have a short season, and it takes 13 days for the queen to be born, another week to go out and get mated, maybe a few more days for her to start laying. So you've got a big gap for all that to happen. That's a lot of time in a season that we have here in Massachusetts. It's very short. Anybody think of another reason? Yeah. Right. It's risky. Some queens go out and get eaten by a bug, or somebody did a study once, maybe it was Tom, I can't remember, that a lot of these queens, this is a really bad arrangement for the queens because all the nukes look the same. So the queen goes in the wrong nuke and she's toast. Hopefully, I paint bluebirds on my hive, so hopefully she can see that. Got another reason, Cliff? Okay. I'll give you one more reason that I think Mike Palmer is cognizant of, and that is that the tendency to swarm is genetic. So guess what happens if you're like me and you keep making more hives out of the hives that are about to swarm? You're selecting for swarming, right, which you don't necessarily want to do. So when Mike was speaking last week, he said, I don't use those to make more hives, but he equivocated. He understands why some people do. He's more likely to do. Alex? Next slide. No worries. That's my purse a few weeks ago. What's in your wallet? This is what's in my wallet. These are, I bought half a dozen queens, all very good ones from New England Beekeeping, Rick Rault. Put them in my purse to keep them warm. And, he's got these brand new, freshly mated queens. So I started a bunch of splits with those as well. And all things being equal, that's a great way to go. These queens are laying like champions and going like a house of fire, but they cost $35 a piece. That's the only downside. Yeah.
So, would you cut out the queen cells when
I would either, I would usually make splits and put the new queen in with a split. Without a queen cell, yeah. Yeah. Now, you keep bees for different reasons. Some people are into honey production, like Mike Palmer. He is wholesaling his honey. So he wants strong queens, high honey production. He doesn't have time to mess around. I'm a little bit different. I have a business model where I am teaching young people, and I'm also providing some private beekeeping services for people around Lexington who want bees in their garden. So they don't need a big honey crop. They want the neighborhood pollinated. They want to enjoy watching the bees. But I don't necessarily want a monster in their backyard with 8 supers on it. That's not necessarily beneficial. So I don't mind that, I'll have a gap for a while and maybe these bees won't produce a huge honey crop if I'm doing a walkaway split. So I have the whole range of new bees with strong first-year queens to walkaway splits to, I find it very difficult to kill a queen. Regicide, it's very difficult. I know I should harden myself, but it's hard. It's always hard to kill a queen. Okay, more biology. Next slide. This is a page from Tom from Honeybee Democracy, and I just thought that was pretty funny. What the bees do is shake the queen. The queen, like many of us after COVID, when we haven't been out a lot, we gain weight. My doctor said that the average is 1.5 pounds per month for those of us who've been enjoying COVID in the Northeast. The COVID-20. Yeah. So these queens who haven't left the hive, they haven't been on a flight since their nuptial flight, a week after they were born, they get big. And so they go to, Anne's Pilates class. The workers literally start shaking the queen and putting her on an exercise program so that she gets small enough and thin enough and in shape enough to fly. So now you've got all these queen cells with the baby queens in them, and the workers have got the queen in shape. They put her in boot camp. They shake her every day, constantly, no peace. And then you get, next slide, onto my cherry tree, and you see the bivouac. And then, if you're in Middlesex County, hopefully somebody will call me, and I'll go out. Next slide. And here I am. I posted on Facebook. I prefer my swarms with cherry blossoms. The whole family, you get one of these swarms, and the whole family comes out, sometimes the whole neighborhood, because it's always fun to watch. And they came out, and I said to them, would you mind taking some pictures? I've been catching swarms for 40 years, and I don't know if I've ever seen one this pretty, with pink flowers coming out of it. So that's beautiful. So into the hive they go. Okay, next slide. All right, we'll talk about nests. I'm going to pause on that for a minute and talk about if you don't want your hives to swarm, if you want that honey crop. I don't know about you, but I'm getting pretty good money for my local honey, especially from people who know me in Lexington. So, if I lose 40 pounds of honey, I'm losing hundreds of dollars. It's not that huge a deal for me, but if there's anything that makes me crazy, it's seeing a great queen with 5 pounds of bees 40 feet up a tree, as I did 2 days ago. One of my bees swarm, we tried everything, but when they're 40 feet up, I call those a widowmaker. You can't, it's just too dangerous. And as a swarm coordinator, I don't assign those anymore. I don't want people getting hurt. If something is way up in a tree, I either say let it go, or of course I go out and try. If no one else can get it safely, I might try. So the easiest thing to do to prevent swarms in your hives is super early, super often. Mike Palmer, he has videos all over YouTube, so if you are looking to study from a great beekeeper, I highly recommend them. Watch Mike Palmer's videos, and he will put 2 honey supers on when he sees the dandelions. The reason that the bees are swarming is that particularly the brood nest is getting crowded. When the nectar starts coming in and there's no space in the brood nest, that's when they start making swarm cells. So get in there early and put the supers on top. And I also start checkerboarding if I know that they're really strong and I catch them before they start making swarm cells. I'll put some empty frames in the brood nest. You got to be careful, because if you get these cold days, you don't want to chill the brood. And we're doing this in maybe March or April. So be careful about that. You don't want to separate the brood nest if you're going to end up killing brood. And another thing that we often do is flip the deep supers. Many of us overwinter 2 deep supers. And the brood nest, if anybody's read Miller's book, The Hive and the Honeybee, if I've got the name right, there's a beautiful diagram. The brood nest looks kind of like it's spherical, almost like a football, with a brood in the middle and the pollen all around the edges, and then the honey around the edges and that. So if you've got that spanning between the 2 deep supers and you reverse that, you've split up the brood nest and you've really messed up the bees and maybe killed some brood. But a lot of times you'll find all the brood, they've moved up over the winter into the top super for warmth, and all the brood will be up there. And the queen likes to go up. She doesn't like to go down. So you can take the bottom super and put it on top, and suddenly the queen has a lot more space to lay. So, there's 3 things to do. Put honey supers on top, put some empty frames, if you can do it without breaking up the brood nest too much on cold nights, or reverse the supers. And you got to do that early, because once they get queen cells in there, they're going. Their bags are packed. And there are people who go in and will cut out all the queen cells, which you can do, and it may work. But if you have a very crowded hive that has lots and lots of queen cells, there's a very good chance you're going to miss one. And also, if you have a crowded hive, you may not find the queen. I can see in my 5-frame nukes, I got a pretty good chance of seeing a queen. Because there's not that many bees. If you have 2 deep supers full of thousands of bees, you may not see that queen. And if you start cutting out the swarm cells, and they've already swarmed, you may be ending up with a hopelessly queenless hive. Hopelessly queenless means they don't have a tiny larva to make a new queen. And if they become hopelessly queenless, they don't have a queen, they can't make a queen, then eventually the hive will die, and in the meantime you may end up with laying workers, which is another whole mess that I won't go into. But once you get laying workers, I tell people just shake them out. Don't even try to bring them back. Shake them out and they'll go into another hive. Okay, so watch for the queen cells. Now I want to talk a little bit about making the swarm traps, and you probably can't, can you read any of this slide? Okay. I'll read some of it to you. This is part of a study that Tom Seeley did when he was a graduate student. And he was an undergrad at Cornell, and then he got his graduate degree at Harvard. He decided to not go to med school as he originally planned, but be a beekeeper. I'm sure his parents loved that. So he did a study which seems to be the pivotal study in swarms. We're all still quoting it today, where he went out to the Arnott Forest, which is a forest around Cornell, and tested to find out where swarms go. And he had, I think he may have had undergrads helping him or something, but he put different size boxes and different configurations all over the forest. And he got to the point where he could pretty much predict where a swarm would go in the wild. And this chart, I'm going to come up here and read it to you and tell you some of the most important things. He found that the optimal size of a swarm trap is about 10 gallons, which is roughly the size of a deep super. They want a small entrance, somewhere between 12.5 and 75 square centimeters. So big open entrance, not good. They want to be able to defend it, and it needs to be weatherproof. And then the other aspect that seems to be the most important is the height of the entrance. Now, we all know that the bee's natural habitat is a hollow tree. And ideally, the entrance in the tree is somewhere between 5 meters and 1 meter. So at least 3 feet up, less than 5 feet up. And the reason for that is that you want predators to have a hard time getting to the entrance. I have, at my house right now, I've also posted this on Facebook, I have an apiary right outside my bedroom on a flat roof. And last week I noticed that I had an empty super there, figuring swarm season, an empty nuke box, 5-frame nuke box. And I thought, maybe I'll catch a swarm from somewhere. And every morning that nuke box was flipped over. And I posted it on Facebook and said, any ideas? And people wrote in, and then I was lying in bed and I heard the thing go over. And I walked up and looked out, and there's Rocky Raccoon. And every single night, he comes up there, and so I cleaned up my bee yard, and he pulls it over, he pulls out the comb, eats some of it, and then he goes off. And so now I've got two strong hives there. I've got one really strong hive that I think he leaves alone. I've got another hive that's 2 supers, and I took the empty swarm box out of there, and I took all the nuke boxes out of there. And I can see there's gravel on the roof, and all around this one hive, you can see where he comes in at night and he digs the gravel around and gets the bees to come out, and then I think he's eating the guard bees. And it's driving me nuts. He's still doing it. If you have any ideas, I put bricks, heavy bricks in the entrance as entrance reducers. And this morning, the bricks are all over the place. And I'm looking at it thinking, I'm pretty sure the bees didn't move the bricks. So Rocky's still at it. So that's a long way of saying you want something that's going to be up at least a meter. Oh, okay. Make him hurt his little paws going over there. That's a good idea. Thumbtacks. You got another idea? Put that in front of the hive, not as an entrance, not as a mouse guard. Okay. I thought of that, yeah. I actually thought about calling. There's no legal place to shoot a gun in Lexington, and I thought, I know there are these laws that you can shoot something if it's bothering your livestock, but you can imagine the conversation with the Lexington police, so I didn't go there. In the back? Carpet tack strips, okay. I gather we've got a fair number of raccoons in Plymouth County. And skunks, yeah. Okay, well, I will try that and report back, but we'll move on from the raccoons. I think I'm looking at the rest of the chart, which unfortunately you probably can't see. There's other permutations. You know, he tried all these different things. He tried drilling holes in it, position of the entrance. It's a little bit better at the bottom than the top. They've done these studies about how bees thermoregulate the hive, and they get the draft going through it so they can keep a constant temperature. Shape of the cavity doesn't, he said cubical or tall is probably better. Whether it's wet or dry, he says it doesn't really matter because they can waterproof a leaky cavity. They can propolis it shut. So I'm looking at, south facing is better. We all try to face our hive south if we can. But I would say that the three most important things for the swarm trap are the height, the size, and a small entrance if you're going to try to trap them. And next slide, Alex. After I read that, I thought that's all true, but, and this is also from the same book. It's very difficult to see actually, but these are two nest boxes mounted on power line poles, and I thought that's pretty funny because he's got the same situation that I do. We know that the optimal size is 10 gallons, but if you can climb a tree with a full super under your arm and get it up there and staying, you're better off than I am. I'm using the 5-frame nuke boxes. I know it's not optimal, but the beekeeper gets a little consideration. Getting a full size, I only know one or two people who put full size 10-gallon swarm traps up there, and maybe they catch more swarms than I do. I don't know. I actually don't catch that many swarms. I find it very difficult to do, and I'd be interested if any of you are catching swarms regularly in the swarm boxes, because bees are hardwired to swarm away from the apiary. So the hive trap that you put in your own apiary will not be used by your own bees. I've caught other people's bees in my swarm traps, but not my own. Yeah, it's always better when you catch other people's. Okay, next slide. I'll show you, this is one of mine, and this is about 10 feet up a tree. It's a 5-frame nuke box. I also use the secret sauce. There are some things on the market. When we started out, beekeeping has evolved in the last 40 years. It used to be, me and a bunch of old farmers, and there was no such thing as pre-built equipment. You had to get the equipment, go down to the store, get the equipment, and then nail it all together yourself. It was a real revelation when I found that you could buy a frame already built. I mean, wow. A bunch of slackers. So... And what we would do, we all have our secret recipe for attracting swarms, and many of us have a jar in our garage of rubbing alcohol, and what's in it? Dead queens. Yep, the queen pheromone. So, all of us old-time beekeepers got a jar of dead queens in alcohol, and you put a little of that on there. What else? Lemongrass oil. Yep, that's good. 3 drops. 3 drops of lemongrass oil. All right, now we're going to, I admit I buy the Swarm Commander. And you can buy it in a couple of different forms. There are these commercial swarmlures. They've managed to mimic the pheromone, the queen pheromone, which really does seem to work. And you can buy it in a little spray. So I'll put a couple of combs in there, spray the combs, and spray the entrance. And bees are always checking it out. They're interested. And you can also buy The swarm commander comes in a little lure. It looks like a little rubber thing about 3 inches high, and it's permeated with a swarm lure, which actually does seem to work. When I was at EAS, the Eastern Apiculture Society conference a few years ago, they always have an apiary out there in the field for the society annual conference, and there was a swarm. So, of course, one of the guys selling this stuff goes out and pins the swarm lure thing, the swarm commander lure, to the tree, and they went right over. So we all went off and bought them. Yeah, you sold a lot that day. And there's also swarm lures. I bought some from, I buy a lot from Better Bee in New York. I find they're a very good company, very good service, and they managed to get things to me from New York to Lexington in just 2 or 3 days. They're fast. And they have these little swarm lures that come in a vial, and they say, don't open the vial, just stick it in, and you can pin it to the top of a frame or just squish it into the honeycomb. And the bees are very interested. I was catching a swarm a couple days ago, and I must have had swarm lure something on my jacket, because I was standing there and the neighbors all watching with a cloud of bees. I looked like Pigpen from the Peanuts with this cloud around me, and they weren't trying to sting me. They just they thought that I smelled interesting, and I'd walk to the other side of the yard, and they'd all come with me. So, not that I minded. Okay, so those are my swarm traps, and I'll talk a little bit about catching swarms and show you some of the swarms that I caught. So we have a system, and I'm not sure that other counties have it. For the last 10 or 15 years, as I mentioned, I am the swarm coordinator in Middlesex County. And I should mention that it's a calling. Because of all the challenges that honeybees have, unfortunately, if you don't catch them in the bivouac stage, they'll send scouts out, and you can read all about it in this book. Just like they send scouts out to find another home, hopefully a hollow tree, maybe the eaves of one of your neighbor's houses. And once they find a good home and they decide on it, they're gone, and you'll never see them again. And if that happens, they have a very low percentage survival in the wild. So when we can catch them in the bivouac stage, we're usually saving their lives. I've seen some statistics that say something like they have a 5% survival rate if they just go in the wild. Now, I don't know. I don't really believe those statistics, because I don't know how anyone would know. And I've debated with Tom Seeley. He tells me that there are still wild bees in the Arnott Forest, and he invited me. Harvard has a forest in Petersham, Massachusetts, and he said, I would bet you that if you go out there, you will still find some wild bees in the trees, but I don't have time to do that, so I never did. It does happen, and I had one in my neighborhood. And as soon as spring came, I ran down, but they didn't survive the winter. So I wonder. Yeah. So yeah, there may still be there, and it may depend on where you are. How thick the tree is, yeah. Yeah, I won't go off too much into the woods here, but Tom also gives a lecture on evolutionary beekeeping, and I was a biology major undergrad, and I've always believed that the closer that you can mimic the bee's natural environment, the better for survival. And one of the things that always surprised me from the time I was a teenager is how we put these bees in boxes that have 3/8 inch of wood, when their national environment is a tree, which, you know, has an R value of something big. Yeah, so they were. And also, you know, one of the reasons that I started beekeeping was in Lexington. I had an uncle who had an apple tree in his backyard, and those bees lived for years and years and years. But that used to happen on a regular basis. Back in the 80s, I was a bee inspector for the state. And I would go around and I would routinely find old farmers who hadn't touched their bees in years. And the bees were still doing fine. They were really wild animals at that point. Now they're more like livestock. If you don't treat them for varroa and take care of them, unfortunately, they'll die. And some of my friends who saw the transition, like Anita Deely, and they said, you know, when the varroa came in, all those guys are gone. A lot of them have lost the bees. Okay, so this is my swarm trap, and that is the least likely way that I usually catch swarms. I usually catch them because somebody calls me. My number is all over the internet, and people will call me with a swarm. And I have, in Middlesex County, what we do is people sign up to be on the swarm list, which looks a little bit like, actually I'm not sure if you guys have a swarm list on your website, I can't remember, but our swarm list is not public, it's private, and it gets sent to me, and when a call comes in, it gets routed through me as an operator, and then I instantly send out a blast by text and or email, whichever you prefer. Most people opt for both. It says, swarm right now in Belmont, want it. If you do, email me back, alex@lexingtonbee.com, and then I kind of spread them out and make sure that, you know, there's some people who are on it every time, and they'll take 100% of the swarms if they can, and some people who only want the super simple ones. And there's some people who have never caught a swarm before, and they say, I'd like to have this swarm, but, you know, can you help me? And I will. I'll talk them through it, or even help if they're nearby, so that they can learn this skill. And I don't self-deal. I will send the swarms out. You know, I've got enough of my own bees so that I will assign the swarm to somebody on the list who is, you know, relatively one of the first to say something and hasn't taken a bunch of swarms already this season, and, you know, the various equity factors. They'll take the swarm, and it's worked out very well. People tend to be, you know, very pleased with the way it's working, I think. Occasionally, as I said, there'll be a swarm that either no one takes, usually on the Friday night of Memorial Day weekend, everybody's on their way down to the Cape, or it is so dangerous that either I won't assign it, I am not going to send somebody out to get a swarm in 40 feet up a tree, or nobody wants it because it's very difficult. And there are swarms which even I have to let fly away because it's not safe. But if I can, I will. And I've been doing it for long enough, so I'm pretty good. So the next slide, Alex, is one I caught 2 days ago. I got a call from a couple in Concord. They're actually beekeepers. And they said, our hive swarmed, and can you give it away? We can't get it. And they sent me this picture. And that's the swarm. Okay, go back, Alex. Anybody see the swarm in the picture the Concord people sent me? It is right there. So, I thought about it, and I had been talking. I have a good friend who lives in the North Shore, Marty Jessel. Some of you probably know him. He is an avid swarm catcher. He has a van that's a swarm mobile. You know, I used to say if there was a swarm on the moon, Marty would go for it. And we had been talking that 3 hours before about tanging. Anybody know what tanging is? Yeah, you bang like a metal pot or something and the bees come down. So I called Marty and I said, okay, Marty, you think you can tang? Come on down. So Marty and I met in Concord. And what I later found out, I'm not going to go into tanging because that's a whole different subject and it's very mysterious. I'm still scratching my head over it, but I have seen videos on YouTube where tanging supposedly works and brings a swarm down, but you have to catch them when the bees are exiting the hive. If they've already settled in the bivouac, it's too late. And this had been in the bivouac. So next slide, Alex. So this is the swarm. And Marty set up a ladder. You know, we found the tallest ladder we can, and Marty had, you know, we all have our cockamamie methods, you know, the extending pole saw, the bucket. And Marty had a long pole with a bucket screwed onto the end, which is kind of nice because it's stiff. So if you can get the bucket underneath the swarm, you can jerk it and the bees fall into the bucket, and then he has 5-gallon paint strainers that you buy at the hardware store and, you know, put that over it. But this was an arborvitae tree, and if you know arborvitae trees, they have a lot of branches going every which direction. And so he went up on the ladder, which went up about 15 feet, and then got the pole, and he could get the bucket to the height of the swarm, but he couldn't get it to the swarm because of all the branches. So what would you do? Well, the BVAC won't go up 30 feet. Yeah. Yeah, that's, you can't, you can barely get a bucket. He couldn't even get the bucket close to the swarm. That's thinking. Yeah? Sawing down the tree, okay. The homeowners did not give us that option. And coincidentally, my brother lives in Concord, about 1 minute away. So I called him and I said, hey, Chris, you got a ladder? He does construction. And he said, oh, somebody stole my ladder. I said, well, come on over anyway. I'm 1 minute from your house. So, you know, he and his wife come over and everybody's staying around the backyard. And I'm staying next to my brother thinking, and my brother knows exactly what I'm thinking, and he says, I'll bet you could climb that tree. So that picture was taken by me. Next slide. And there's me. I went up the ladder, took the bucket off the pole, and arborvitaes are nice because they have a lot of branches that are only, you know, a couple inches wide, but they're strong. And I'm happy to say, and I see Anna smiling. She and I are health nuts. And yeah, I wasn't going to do anything that hurts. And the thing, I got it there, and I got the bucket underneath it, but I had the 5-gallon paint strainer in my back pocket, but you need 2 hands. And I'm not doing that. I am keeping 2 feet and 1 arm on that tree. So I got them in the bucket. I ended up just throwing the paint strainer on top of them and getting them down. And I got them, when I got to the ladder, somebody else said, you want me to take the bucket? Yeah, and I handed the bucket down. And then they put the paint strainer on top of it. And then you get the challenge. What are you going to do next? You've got a queen, you know, who can fly. Maybe you have a queen. You don't know if you have a queen. And oftentimes, when you get a situation like that, you don't get them all, and the bees start forming again in the top of the tree. And I'm not going up a second time. this is quite a climb. I haven't climbed a tree like this in 10 years, but I'm not letting those bees go. So the next thing that I did is I am getting, pretty good, as I've been doing this for a while, at spotting queens. I said, take the top off and then use my speed reading vision on this swarm. There she is. And I went out and got one of those plastic queen clips that I had in my truck, run back, do it again. Second scary point, because she could just, you imagine everybody's had a queen fly across the yard once, and you see this, $35 flying across the yard. And so, okay, take it off, and then there she is. Got her. Game over. Next slide. Put her in the nuke. And that's my 5-frame nuke at the bottom of the tree. And this morning at 5 a.m., I went out. I took that picture at 5 a.m. this morning. Waited for all the bees. I didn't want to leave the bees alone that were at the top of the tree, so I left the nuke there. And I left the queen in the clip. So I know she wasn't going anywhere, and just went and picked it up this morning. Put it in the back of my car, went 1 minute away, drank coffee with my brother and his wife, and then brought the bees home and requeened a colony that needed a new queen. Happy ending all around. So that's pretty much what I want to say about swarms. I have answers to every question, may or may not be right, but I have answers to everything. Last slide. I can talk about a lot of things, and this is honey almond bee Scotty. I just happen to have some, which I made this afternoon. I mentor the Lexington High School Bee Club. It was started by my daughter about 5 years ago, and one of the gratifying things about keeping bees now, when my daughter goes to the same schools, the public schools in Lexington that I went to back in the 70s, and where I was a weirdo because I kept bees, she's cool. And many of you have been around for a long time, are happy to see that we beekeepers are now cool. Unfortunately, it's harder to keep bees alive than it ever has been before. But on the other hand, there's so many people who are thankful that we're doing it and very interested in it. And right out of the box, the first day, Anastasia came home from the high school club fair, and she said over 100 kids signed up to be in the bee club. And she's gone off to college, but we still have a very strong club. They made a website for me. I work together with these kids, mentoring them, and we do research on varroa mites. We're part of the Bee Informed Partnership Sentinel program. We have a research apiary, and the kids are learning about bees and doing all kinds of wonderful things. And so we support the research in the club by selling things. And these kids, you can look at my website, which is lexingtonbee.com. These kids are obviously far and away more savvy on the technical things. They made a Shopify site, and we're selling candles and soap and all kinds of cool stuff. And we sell Bee Scotty. One of the kids said, "Oh, Alex, don't call it biscotti, call it Bee Scotty." Oh yeah, that makes sense. So I have these if you wanted to get some. And if you're watching on Facebook, Ann and Cliff and Alix will drive it to your house if you want. And I had somebody else call in town. It's so nice when people are so supportive when they find something that, is not just something you bought on Amazon. It's something local and interesting. People are very supportive of this. And I had somebody call me up and said, "Can you make us some honey tea stirrers for some welcome gifts that we're doing for some group in town?" And I thought about it. I said, yes. So these are $1 a piece if you want to try them. They are made out of honey with some caro syrup and sugar to hold them together. And instead of putting honey in your tea, you can put this little bee in that's full of honey. So that's my talk on swarms. The last slide is my office in Lexington, and I got this great new desk, and it has a place for a beehive, as good use of space. Put a beehive next to your computer, my little observation hive. Yeah, so that's me when I'm practicing law. Okay, any questions? If not, I'm going to race out and catch that swarm. Is when it's in Plimpton right now. Yeah? In your school truck, do you put 5 frames in? No, I don't put 5 frames in, and there's all kinds of different schools of thought. Some people say don't put frames in because, especially if they're brood frames, they'll just be a wax moth mess. I've weighed that, the pros and cons, but I do put old comb in. I think it helps. Yeah. So I do, but I'll only put 1 or 2. Just I think the bees prefer. I don't think it was on that chart that Tom did, but I think the bees do seem to prefer a place where they know bees have lived before. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. The question was, what percentage of bees have to agree when they're in the bivouac on the new home? And I actually had a few slides on that I decided at the last minute not to put in. But there's some charts from Tom's book. And there was a guy, it was right after World War II, one of the German bee researchers, right outside, I think it was the Berlin Zoo. If anybody's read the book, maybe you can correct me. There was a bee swarm bivouac at the Berlin Zoo, and so this bee researcher, came over and examined it, and he found dirty bees on the outside, and they were dancing. And he thought, what's up with the dancing bees, and why are they dirty? And the reason was that just like bees dance to indicate where there are flowers, when they're in the bivouac, they're sending out scouts to find out where there are places to live. And this book, Honeybee Democracy, is really mostly about that, where Tom took it a step further and started making these studies and found that the scout bees would go out and the enthusiasm of their dance, they would get other bees to follow them. And their charts in the book of, say, at time 0, you've got 10 bees dancing in 10 different directions, and an hour later, you've got a lot of bees going one direction, and 2 hours later, and then, as it goes on, he's got these funny-looking star charts indicating the number of bees dancing for a certain direction, and the bees are also encouraging each other, or, if one bee's advocating a lousy home, they'll try to stop that bee from dancing. And at a certain point, you get all the bees, not everybody's dancing, but all the scout bees who dance are all agreeing, okay, this is going to be our new address. And when that happens, they're gone. Swarm consensus. And you can read them, just like, if you're good, and you know the waggle dance, you can tell where the bee is found the flowers. So what Tom did is he took these bees out to Appledore Island, which is an island that Cornell owns off, I think it's off the coast of Maine or New Hampshire. So there's nothing there. He takes them so far away that they can't go anywhere else. And he brings a swarm of bees, sets up 5 swarm boxes around the island, then watches them dance. And he said 4 out of 5 times he could predict which swarm box they were going to go to. They almost always selected the quote-unquote best box. Unfortunately, the first time there was one ornery lobsterman caretaker on the island. They chose his chimney, but after they sorted that out, they closed off the chimney and got them going to his swarm boxes, and they could read the dirty dancers. Yeah. Yeah.
I was under the impression that they knew where they were going before they gathered up in a tree. That's not correct?
No. That's another really good question, because I see on my swarm traps.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. The question is, do they know where they're going before they leave the original hive? And the answer is, I don't know. But I would guess that there may be some, because typically they'll go to the bivouac relatively close to the original hive, usually within 1,000 feet. And then they're going through the dirty dancing and voting and consensus and deciding where we want to live next. But I have noticed in my swarm traps that there's always bees going in and out. Even though I look and think, oh, I got some, oh, no, I don't have anything. There's always scout bees, and other people have seen the same things. There's always scout bees going in and out of the swarm traps, and it could be one of 2 reasons. One is there's a little bit of honey in there, and they're just going for a snack. But it could also be that they're going in there to check it out because they're the elder bees. Bees are one of my favorite bee phrases. Temporal polyetheism. Who knows what that means? Temporal polyetheism. That means temporal time, poly, many, ethos, work. It means bees have different jobs at different ages. And as you may be aware, the first job a bee has when she's born is housekeeping. She cleans out the cell that she was born in. And the last job that a bee has is foraging. That's the last 4 or 5 days of their life. So the bees that you see out on the flowers have a death sentence. They'll be dead. So it's these senior bees that are out foraging, and they may be looking for a place to live. I don't know. So, once they get to the bivouac, it's very possible that the bees dancing have been visiting that place last week. The graveyard. Yep. That reminds me of, some of us know our friend Ken Warchall, the bee inspector. He was giving a lecture on Zoom a couple of weeks ago and talking about swarm control. He says, "False swarm 'em." And I said, "That's great." And that's what false swarm 'em. That's when you take out kind of what I should have talked more about false swarming them. If you take out the old queen and a bunch of brood, if you think your hive is gonna swarm, you make a split. You take out that old queen and you take out a bunch of frames of brood, move them all, they think they've swarmed, and they won't swarm, and you got them, and then you got 2 hives. So that's another great method of swarm control. Okay, we're losing the light. I'm going to run down to Plimpton and catch that swarm. Thank you very much for listening. With the biscotti, you have to eat it with coffee. It's very hard. As my mother says, you'll break your tooth. But it's very good. You dip that in coffee, and if you drink tea, buy a tea stirrer. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. And if anybody would like to buy any of Alex's wares, they're at the back table here.
So, do we need a motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor? Oh, 1 second. Bonnie's here.
Can you make the announcement that we have to have
Right, okay. We have to have in-person meetings in June and July so that we can get the Marshfield Fair going. This is critical this year because we're really short on time. What's that? Well, the Zoom meeting, the June meeting is at the yeah, no, but it's still a meeting. I mean, we can still get volunteers and, you know, we got to give Bonnie a lot of help because we're really short on time to get this going this year. This is our biggest outreach, public outreach we ever have, and we didn't have it last year, so let's make it happen. The Jones River Watershed is in Kingston, and that will be the one in June. Yeah, and well, I mean, if we're only going to have this many people show up, we're going to go back to the clubhouse. But that's a shame because we should have this room filled. We've got 500 members, and we have audio, visual, everything is here. So it is. It is. It's a haul down here, but you know, even the Hanson people have to travel once in a while. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. These people have been traveling for a long time, so now it's our turn. All right. I think we're done. Goodbye.
There's something sweet that I made over.
Oh, something sweet?